Good afternoon, Chamber members. For those of you I have not met yet, I'm Sabrina Binkley, Head of School at Spruce Tree Montessori and Chair of the Fairbanks Chamber Board of Directors. I'd like to take a moment, as we do each week, to recognize and thank our executive partners whose logos you saw on the screen before we began our program today. These businesses provide a rock-solid foundation for the Chamber, and we appreciate their support year-round. It's not only financial. These businesses share knowledge and experience that really help shape and direct our advocacy efforts and create awareness that drives economic strength and growth for interior Alaska. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. And now I'd like to welcome Brenna online to help us recognize our new and renewing members. Brenna?
Thanks, Sabrina, and hello, everyone. I hope you had a good holiday week. We have 4 new members to welcome this week. Thanks in part to a lot of our fun Shop Local efforts that made them aware of the Chamber and the opportunities of being a membership. So we're very excited to welcome them on board. And those 4 are Alaska Behavioral Health, which is actually also based out of Anchorage. So we're excited to partner with them. Pip Printing, which is also an Anchorage-based member, but they have everything you need for any marketing campaigns, printers, postal mailings, anything like that. And then Marlowe's Bakery. So they're located right off of Airport Way, and they make wonderful croissants. That's my go-to. And then last is East Ramp Wood-Fired Pizza, and they are located on the small aircraft side of the airport. So if you're looking for a pizza and a show of airplanes, you can head over there and enjoy their delicious pizza. We'd also like to thank our renewing members, starting with Alaska Connect, also known as Ampersand now, Bill Robertson as an individual member, Northern Alaska Tour Company, Alaska Gold Panners, Alaska Rare Coins, Operating Engineers Local 302, Hoffer Glass, Alaska Tags and Titles, also known as the UMD, Alaska Rare Coins, Denny's, Dunlap Agency, Greer Tank and Welding, Stutzman's Engineering Associates, Lavelle's Bistro, Wright Air, and Pike's Waterfront Lodge. Thank you for renewing your membership. We also have some members that we're welcoming to the 110% Club, which means that these members have donated above and beyond their membership dues to help us with our advocacy actions. This week, we're welcoming Beeline Construction, Spalding Chiropractic Clinic, Craig Taylor Equipment, Plumbers and Steam Fitters Union Local 375, the Pump House Restaurant, and Sandy Can Lamenta Pumping and Thawing. Thank you for going above and beyond your membership dues to help us. And today's membership minute really focuses on what the Chamber can do for you right now. So I know a lot of businesses are figuring out their holiday plans, what they plan to offer. If you have anything special that you're offering or anything that you think the Chamber should know about, whether it's maybe a new promotion that you're doing or something that you're doing to give back to the community, feel free to reach out to us so we can help share in your positive marketing and help push that out to the community and just give you the recognition that you deserve and also help your customers know what's going on. So if you have anything that you want to help us help promote you, just let us know. All right, back to you, Sabrina.
Great, thank you, Brenna. So our last Chamber Board of Directors meeting of this year is next Monday at noon, and we'll be wrapping up our discussions about our 2021 advocacy agenda and updating 2 of the Chamber's advocacy positions. And with this being our last live general business meeting of the year, I wanted to say how privileged I felt to have had this opportunity along my professional journey. Working with Marissa and the Chamber team, not to mention the 30+ board members and stellar committee chairs and committee members this year, in what we can all agree was a year we won't soon forget, or maybe we will forget. Maybe we'll wake up on New Year's Day this year and it will all be a dream. But symbolically, though, it really has been as easy as a dream to lead this dedicated, highly engaged Chamber through a year of uncertainty. The ease wasn't in the details, though. We all learned a lot and continue to enjoy the lessons and takeaways we share after each and every virtual meeting. And I would be remiss if I didn't find it challenging at times to balance my work as a school leader with my charge at this Chamber. But one thing that is certain is the loyalty and genuine care and concern that this community, our Chamber community, shows each and every day for Fairbanks and the interior economy. I've appreciated the calls and emails from so many of our members, both supportive and constructive, and have benefited greatly from the exposure to all sectors and issues that our Chamber is dedicated to advocating for or against. And as your chair, that has provided me with great and valuable experience. Thank you so much for your support this year. I am truly grateful. And don't forget to attend our annual meeting next Tuesday, which Marissa is here to tell you all about. Marissa?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sabrina. You are absolutely right. This was a really challenging year, and as fortunate as you felt to be on the team with us, we were incredibly fortunate to have you at our helm this year. Sabrina, for those of you that don't know, Sabrina always brings this air of like cool, calm collectiveness that is much appreciated in times of challenge. So we really appreciate you. So Sabrina did mention that we have our annual meeting coming up next week. That is a week from today on December 8th. We'll be coming at you live from our brand new interactive platform called Hop In. If you haven't heard us talk about that yet, I just want to let you know it's really exciting. We've had an opportunity to play around with that as a staff, and we're excited about getting our members in there as well. You'll find opportunities to connect and network with other members. You'll be able to see the fun new ways that we're able to showcase and highlight our sponsors. And then also for businesses to be able to highlight themselves in an expo style format. And we'll also be able to bring you multimedia presentations that we will be sharing with our memberships as we highlight all of our accomplishments from 2020. So there are a couple things to note that there are an extra step in that registration process. So if you go to fairbankschamber.org and click on the annual meeting banner, then follow those directions that follow immediately after your first registration step. If you have any questions or if you have any difficulties, don't hesitate to call Katie or anyone really here at the Chamber, and we'll make sure that you've got an easy process and that you can enjoy this event. So grab your tickets early. We are asking for folks to go ahead and register by Friday. So you have until the end of the week to get registered. Things to note is that you will have a couple of lunch options that you can pick from. We've selected some of our Chamber members to offer a special item from each of their menus. So as a participant, you'll pick which lunch option you want. Unfortunately, we don't have access to a fleet of vehicles here at the Chamber, so we're just asking our members to go pick up their lunch ahead of the meeting this year. Bring it back to your desk so that you can enjoy your lunch while you're enjoying the presentation. So make sure that you do that. If you've got any questions, again, just give us a call and ask us those, although it should be pretty clear. And lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out and thanks to our sponsors of the event this year. So Wells Fargo Bank, Mac Federal Credit Union, Spruce Tree Montessori, and GCI. Thank you so much for sponsoring the various components of that program this year. And then my final announcement for today, actually, no, I have two more announcements for today. The Around the Town in 80 Days a campaign we have going, we've officially wrapped up week 7, and we'll announce our week 8 featured businesses tomorrow online. But as you know, because you have joined us here today, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into our week 8 featured businesses. So get your pens and pencils ready. They are Soba Restaurant right here in downtown Fairbanks, Alaska Photo Booth Company. She's got a lot of great online opportunities for you and other digital opportunities. Clarion Hotel and Suites, Equipment Source Incorporated, and Red Raven CBD products. So make sure that you go online and check those out. They've got all of these organizations have Facebook pages or websites that you could check out and learn more about the products and services that they offer. Don't forget to use the hashtag 80daysoflocal on Facebook and Instagram for chances to win weekly prizes. And then each receipt that you save during the campaign from our featured businesses will get you an entry into our grand prize drawing for a pair of Alaska Airlines tickets that you can book anytime in 2021. Remember that when you support your own economy, you're supporting your friends, your neighbors, and your neighbors' friends. So this is a really great opportunity to support local through the remainder of this year and set really good habits for 2021 to continue to support local. And my last announcement for today is about Leadership Fairbanks. The class of 2021 met on Wednesday, November 18th. Of course, they did that via Zoom, and they spent their time learning about the legislative process from Chad Hutchison. He's currently the Alaska State Senate Majority Counsel, but also a distinguished volunteer here at the Chamber and always happy to support the discussions and programs that we have here. So they did spend time talking about the legislative process, and then also the group got together and discussed maximizing employee engagement while so many of us are working remotely. They did an excellent job executing the remote service project in between the October and November sessions, and this group collected turkeys and pies, so they were either team turkey or team pie leading up to Thanksgiving, and of course we're collecting those for the food bank. Leadership Fairbanks facilitator Jeff Welch is proud of them, and he counts himself as incredibly lucky to get to work with this group. And we'll be hearing from Jeff probably in the new year, just kind of an update on Leadership Fairbanks and all the great things that they are doing in this new environment that we all have. So again, you can always find information about all of our events and programs on our website at fairbankschamber.org. Thanks so much, and back to you, Sabrina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marissa. I love the excitement about the annual meeting next week. So now for our main presentation. The number one priority of the Fairbanks Chamber's 2020 advocacy agenda was a long-term fiscal plan, which includes utilizing earnings from the permanent fund as a source for general funds revenue to pay for essential state services. We're grateful to have Angela Rodell from the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation here today to share insight into how this treasured resource is managed and grown. Angela Rodell serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation, selected in 2015 by APFC's Board of Trustees. APFC is a state corporation based in Juneau, Alaska, that manages and invests the $65 billion Alaska Permanent Fund and other funds designated by law. As CEO, Ms. Rodell is leading APFC in a pivotal time in history as it emerges as a revenue-generating center for the state of Alaska. Since becoming CEO, the fund has grown by more than 25%, and APFC has added 17 positions, building internal management capacity. The fund won numerous awards, including North American Limited Partner of the Year for 2017 and 2018 from Private Equity International, along with the recognition by PEI's Private Debt magazine as one of the most influential investors in public credit in 2018. In 2019, Ms. Rodell received global recognition as number 4 among 100 of the most significant, resilient, and impactful asset owner and public executives from the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute. She previously served on APFC's Board of Trustees as a cabinet member and was appointed Commissioner of the Department of Revenue in August of 2013 by Governor Sean Parnell. In addition to oversight of 900 state employees, Commissioner Rodell participated as a member of the Alaska Retirement Management Board, the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation Board, the Alaska State Bond Committee, and the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority. Angela Rodell currently serves as Deputy Chair of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds, as Vice Chair for Pacific Pension and Investment Institute's Board of Directors, on the Alaska Community Foundation's Investment Advisory Committee, and as a member of the Juneau International Airport Board. Ms. Rodell has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a Master's in Public Administration from the University of Kentucky in Lexington. Wow, Angela, I'm so glad to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sabrina. It is so great to be back with the Fairbanks Chamber. It's one of my favorites. I can honestly say that I like doing, I'm just sorry that I'm doing it from very windy, very rainy Juneau, and that, that I'm not able to be there in person. But I'm sure that a year from now, we will be gathering back in person and be able to do this again. So with that, I do have a slide deck that I hope everybody can see, and we'll move to the very first slide. You know, there was a lot of, I really appreciated the comments leading up to this about what's going on with COVID, the fact that we are doing so much virtually, but there are some constants in our lives, and one of those things is the permanent fund. You know, it's amazing to me when we think about all the pressure and all the stress that we may be facing, whether it's with our businesses, with our families, with the holidays, just the normal course of our day, that people had the foresight, Alaskans had the foresight back in 1976 to create something so constant and so permanent like the permanent fund, and that we have this resource to rely on today. I always like to start these presentations, and for those of you who have heard me speak before, you know that I like to start with the constitutional language. And the reason I like to start with the constitutional language is not so much about what's in here, but what isn't in here. And what's in here is actually quite powerful. And that's the idea that we would set aside at least 25% of all mineral lease rentals, royalties, sale proceeds, federal revenue sharing payments, bonuses, into a permanent fund. And the principle of that shall only be used for income producing investments specifically designated by law, and that all income from the permanent fund shall then be deposited into the general fund. So there's no language here within our Constitution about what those investments are, other than they have to be income producing, and that income can be spent basically for any purpose designated by law, because it goes into the general fund. So it's very small. The language is very short, very to the point, and doesn't give much guidance as to what the expectation was, because it recognized that this had to stand the test of time, and that the state's needs would change over that time period, and that perhaps Alaskans would determine that there were other things that were important to do with this money than what was important in 1977. Moving to the next slide, as I alluded, now more than ever, the state is dependent on our effective management and investment of the fund. It is one of Alaska's primary sources of renewable revenue. It takes a draw from the earnings reserve account, and that draw now supports in excess of 70% of Alaska's undesignated general fund budget. To give some context to what that means 70 cents out of every dollar that is used for state troopers comes from the revenue we generate here through the fund. 70 cents of every state dollar used for education is also reliant on the investment earnings of the fund. So that's a pretty high bar, high sense of responsibility. But we believe APFC, we believe we're up to the task, and our prudent investment and management does fulfill two roles now. And the first being that we protect the principle of the fund for the benefit of all current and future generations of Alaskans. And it's also to continue to provide a stable revenue source to help balance the state's budget. So if we move on to slide 5, you'll see we've tried to provide a graphic which illustrates how the fund works. This is a renewable resource. It's been used as a savings device to generate revenue and pay dividends in the past. Today, it's being used not just for dividends, but also for that POMV draw. Money comes into the principal, it's invested, its income and capital gains, once realized, move into the earnings reserve account, and then that earnings reserve account is used for all number of things, including paying APFC's budget, investment management fees, and that draw that we rely on. Diving a bit deeper on slide 6, the principle is that constitutionally established, protected portion of the fund. And since its inception, we have deposited $17.6 billion in royalty. So that's the 25%. In some cases, it's been as much as 50% under certain leases. But that generation of royalty, and for all of you that are in the oil and gas industry, thank you for helping us collect that royalty and save it for those future generations. We've also had the benefit of setting aside $18 billion of inflation proofing. And this is really important because while the principal may be invested in assets that naturally grow because of inflation, it doesn't get the benefit of that growth without inflation proofing. So inflation proofing has been and continues to be a priority for us, because this is how we maintain the purchasing power of the principal to be able to continue to invest. And then finally, over $11 billion of special appropriations have happened. The most recent one was in FY20, when the legislature moved over $4 billion into the principal of the fund to save those earnings to benefit all generations of Alaskans. Moving on to the earnings reserve account. The earnings reserve account is really the workhorse of the fund. It's what you probably see the most activity in, because this is where money moves in and out through this account. And so you will see that in FY21, which started on July 1st, that there are a number of appropriations. First and foremost is that percent of market value of $3.1 billion. We also have an operations budget to fund our operations here in Juneau of $17.7 million. We also have an appropriation of $129.4 million to support investment management fees. And then finally, we also have appropriations to Department of Law, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Revenue to cover the costs of collecting our royalty, any settlements we might be entitled to, and the administrative needs of the corporation. So when we talk about percent of market value, this was enacted back in 2018, and it became effective July 1st, 2018. And what this does is it calculates a draw based on market value rather than realized income. As you might imagine, revenues and income can be very, very volatile over the course of a year. And realized income is really based on the investment decisions. Should we sell a piece of property? Should we sell some shares of stock? Should we collect additional interest? And that's the realized income, whereas market value recognizes the impact on investments without having to actually sell those investments to take advantage of that increased value. It creates a stable draw by averaging the market value over the first 5 of the preceding 6 years. And you'll see this in the chart below. So for the first 3 years, the percent of market value was set at 5.25%. And you can see that starting in FY19, that first draw amount was $2.7 billion. For FY21, we're at $3.09 billion. So a very steady, stable, slight increase, but nothing that would characterize it as a windfall of any kind. So it creates a steadiness to the revenue picture. That 5.25% does step down to 5%. So this will be the first budget cycle where the legislature is using the 5% percent of market value calculation rather than the 5.25%. But you'll see that it doesn't have that big of an impact on the revenue. We go from $3.09 billion in FY21 to $3.07 billion in FY22. And then it begins to grow again based on projections of the fund growth. As we look to the fund size and growth on slide 9, you'll see that the principal, all of its base contributions are now at $46.7 billion. It has attached to it unrealized gains of $7.5 billion. So as those unrealized gains are realized, so we sell those investments and recognize that increase in value, that amount moves over to the earnings reserve account. In the earnings reserve account, we're actually sitting on approximately $11 billion, but you'll see that $3.1 billion is already set aside in anticipation of that POMV appropriation, which leaves $6.3 billion that is available for future appropriations. The earnings reserve account does have its own unrealized gains associated with it, and those total today, as of September 30th, $1.5 billion. So when we look to the fund on slide 10, and to give you an impact of just how important this is to the state of Alaska and all the services that we rely on, you'll see that all revenue for FY20 for the state of Alaska was $11.2 billion. That includes all the federal grant monies that the state might receive. In terms of unrestricted general fund revenue, it was $4.6 billion, and our POMV was 64% of unrestricted general fund. In the chart, you'll see just, it really illustrates visually how much the POMV makes up in revenue versus petroleum revenue, which has always been the traditional source, primary source of revenue for the state of Alaska. And I think that this will continue going forward in light of where the state is. Turning to the corporation and away from the fund for a bit, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing to manage the fund. And we were created as an independent state entity tasked with the management and investment of the permanent fund and other funds designated by law. Those other funds currently are primarily I shouldn't say primarily, they are the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. We believe that we have a worthy purpose, an excellent track record, a strong leadership and culture, a high caliber team, and we continue to get support and guidance from an excellent board of trustees. And we've made, I think, considerable progress since our inception. It's a reflection of that prudence, strength, and resilience, and that success has resulted in a huge transformation of the organization. And I wanted to highlight for you on slide 13 what this evolution and transformation really looks like, because as many of you know, when you're in the middle of things, it's sometimes hard to see if you've grown or not until you take a step back and look back at the road that you've come along. And 2020 marked the 40th anniversary of the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation. And we've done a lot of reflection on just what has happened over the course of that 40 years. And the growth has not happened just in fund size. There's an increased diversity and complexity of those asset classes. Transaction volumes have multiplied. You can see in the chart to the right, you know, in 1980, we were 500 million. In 2020, we're 65 billion. The number of asset classes have gone from 1 to 8. The number of people have gone from, you know, basically a skeleton crew to 58 employees. And the average number of transactions that we are processing have gone from just, look at 224 when I joined the corporation in 2015 to 494 today. And that doesn't even address all the back office investment and requirements. So if you look at electronic service costs, legal costs, we've gone from $2 million in 2015 to $6.9 million today. So a lot of work as a result, because as the fund grows, we become much more subject to whether it's regulatory platforms, regulatory requirements that kick in when you hit certain asset under management sizes, the sophistication of cyber and technology, crime, fraud, malpractice, all of this has evolved, and it requires a lot of work on our part to ensure the fund is protected from these developments. So it's vital, and as we look to slide 14, that APFC continue to align to the future, that we expect, and we should expect, that the fund will reach that $90 to $100 billion mark in 10 years, given the trajectory of growth and all other things being equal. that the types and complexity and the velocity of risk have significantly increased. And this is both due to that internal transformation and external factors. And that trend is likely to only accelerate. And the need to expand resources, mature and strengthen control frameworks is real. And that these are needed resources and they're getting put to very good work. And that good work is really illustrated on slide 15, which is to give you a sense of the growth of the value of the fund and the returns that have happened over time. And as you all are aware, markets are volatile. Returns can be very varied throughout the course of a time period. But when we look at the trend lines, you can see how the fund has grown, especially after 2005, when the Permanent Fund Corporation was given the opportunity to invest as a prudent investor, and any limits and requirements on specific asset classes were lifted. And that growth has happened. You can also see in this chart with the two gold lines that returns tend to stay in positive territory over this same time period. So while there have been unusual spikes in growth and unusual valleys in loss, over time, we have had positive earnings, which have led to the growth of the fund. Moving on to slide 16 and getting into the detail of our asset allocation. As I mentioned, and you saw in the risk pictures, in 1980, we had one asset class. It was bonds, fixed income, very steady income producing. But that is not a realistic allocation today. If we were invested all in bonds, we would be making less than 1% a year. 10-year treasury bonds, I think, are around 80 basis points today. So we have diversified. Diversification not only helps generate return, it also helps spread risk around. It gives us access to economies and economic performance around the world, not just within Alaska, not just within the United States. Public equities continue to make up the largest asset class at close to 40%, and bonds make up 20%. So approximately 60% of the fund are invested in highly liquid, highly public asset classes. The balance can be found in either less liquid or illiquid asset classes such as private equity and hedge funds. Looking to fiscal year 21 and the projections of what we expect to earn, we always calculate a low assumption, mid assumption, and a high assumption for FY21, and then a 10-year forecast. So we are looking at a mid-range of 6.48%. Our inflation assumption is 2.25%, which would create a total real return of 4.23%. The statutory return in this column is what that income flow to the earnings reserve account is expected to be. So statutory return is a function of investment activity, not economic or market valuations, which is why you don't see negative numbers for statutory return. We always expect to generate some positive statutory return because we collect monthly rents on our real estate. That's cash that flows directly into the earnings reserve account. We collect interest off of bonds. Again, that's all positive in nature. But we can have a total real return that is negative while still generating income into the earnings reserve account. And that is the tension that faces the Board of Trustees and the corporation. Moving to slide 18, our return on investment. I always like to let Alaskans know how well the corporation did based on the appropriation that was made for funding the corporation and the corporate activities. and always looking for different measures, but this always tends to resonate with a lot of people. And so if we look at the financial statements for FY20, which can also be found on our website, you'll see that $1.8 billion in accounting net income was generated, and that takes into account unrealized losses, unrealized gains. When we take out those unrealized gains and losses, we generated $3.1 billion in statutory net income that was then deposited into the earnings reserve account. If we look at the calendar and look at how many days the market was actually open for us to execute within the United States a transaction, there were 253 trading days in fiscal year 20. So that meant we generated $7.1 million per day in accounting net income and $12.3 million per day in statutory net income. That was against operating expenditures of $120.4 million. And if you're wondering why this is different than the $17.7 million that was the FY21 budget request, it's because there are a lot of investment manager fee monies that are also used to support operating expenditures. For example, many of the systems, like the trading platform that we use to trade every day, is supported out of that appropriation. So what are some key takeaways? We identify key takeaways that there are constitutional and statutory mandates that we are following. Principal provides permanent savings. That permanent savings continues to be invested. The earnings reserve account holds the investment income available for appropriation. And we have prudent rules in place to govern saving, spending, and growth. And we need to continue to respect and observe those rules. Our stewardship from the corporation, we have a long-term horizon. It means prudent investment management, and we are not investing for today and tomorrow, but also for next year, 5 years, even as long as 15, 20 years from now. It is vital to recognize the types, complexity, and velocity of the risks that we take and how they have significantly increased, and that resources are needed to continue to align with the future and the expectations that the state of Alaska and Alaskans have for the corporation. A robust, healthy, permanent fund is important to not just this generation of Alaskans, but to all generations of Alaskans. And with that, I want to mention that we have a ton of information on our website. You can find a lot of detail about how we're invested, where we're invested around the world. And I'm really excited. After a number of years, we have gotten our Alaskans Guide to the Permanent Fund updated for 2020. And that's a great educational resource that you can find also on our website. And so with that, I'm going to pause and hopefully we'll have a lot of questions. It's very different doing this without questions as we go along. So hopefully we do have questions that have been put in to the chat.
Yes, and thank you so much, Angela, for taking us through all that. I know for some of us, it's definitely an education as we go along to learn about some of these financial matters. So thanks for taking the time to break a lot of that down for us. So one question, just to start off on kind of a general level, because I think it's maybe worth mentioning. The Permanent Fund is kind of a special resource for Alaska. I'm sure that you interact a lot with folks who are managing other types of investment funds. How common is it for a state to have an income generating fund like this to fund their state budget?
There are no other states in the United States that are using their fund to the degree that we are able to use the permanent fund. So some states, for example, Wyoming created a permanent fund around the same time as Alaska did. to collect some severance off their coal generation, big miner of coal in Wyoming. It is smaller in size. I want to say it's around $20 billion, and it has very specific dedicated uses. And that's what you'll find in a number of the states that have created funds. Texas Schools is probably the oldest. It was created in the mid 1800s, so almost 200 years ago, and it is dedicated to funding public education in the state of Texas. So that's what I mean about a number of them have very specific dedicated purposes, whereas our fund can be used for any purpose deemed worthy by our elected officials.
Interesting. I didn't know about those other funds. So another factor that we've heard you speak about a couple of times, the legislative deposits, the special appropriations that go into the principal of the permanent fund. Can you help us understand that a little bit better? Because I think it's something that is a little bit confusing to folks when they hear that the 70% of the state's budget or the general fund is coming from the permanent fund earnings. You know, considering all the state's budget struggles or challenges, why would the legislature choose to put some of that money back into the fund principal as opposed to using it to fund the state budget?
No, I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's one of the hardest things we ask of our legislators to do at times, which is not to just consider our most immediate needs, but to also be thinking beyond the next election cycle or the next, the next budget cycle even. And when you see an earnings reserve account get as large as it was getting, so it was approaching almost, I believe, $17-18 billion at the time that the legislature was considering this. I think a number of legislators, I know from listening to floor speeches and things like that a number of legislators felt that it was really important that the bull market run-up that had generated this wealth be preserved in some ways, because Alaska has a history of boom and bust, and we tend to like to spend all of our money while we have it, and then we just sit and wait for the next boom to come along, whether you think about back to fur trading, gold, oil and gas. It's a natural resource cycle that a lot of natural resource sovereigns find themselves in. And when you look at the special appropriations over time, so you look at the $7 billion rather than that $4 billion, that makes up that $11 billion in special appropriations. It came from a variety of sources. So there was a time when legislators would look at what was in the earnings reserve account. You would take out the 50% under the dividend statutes for the dividend, and they would take their balance, the other 50%, and they would deposit it into the principal of the account and save it for future generations. And so I think that culture of Alaskans taking care of future generations because they've been through boom and bust cycles is why we're so fortunate to have the permanent fund today. And it's important to recognize that this is no longer about booms or busts. This is about steadiness of a revenue source, and that we need to maintain that and not treat it as a boom anymore.
Okay, thanks for that. That was very informative to me as well. So one comment that came in, someone specifically asked us to thank you for your presentation and your leadership of APFC. His first question was, if changes in Washington, the new administration comes in, means that there's some less favorable conditions for resource development. How will that affect the earnings?
So the good news is that it'll have a very small impact on earnings. So if you think about royalty, so if resource development is impacted, if we're not able to develop resources in the same way we've been in the past, it means that there will be a reduction in royalty that flows to the state, both the 75% that flows to the general fund and the 25% that flows to the permanent fund. Just to give you a context, though, about how small our royalty is in terms of impact, from July 1 until September 30th, we have only collected $50 million in royalty for the permanent fund in that quarter of time. We're collecting on average around $300 million in royalty to the principal of the fund. So it's important, it's incredibly important to us to continue to collect royalty, but it is not the big wealth generator for the permanent fund that it once was. Instead, our wealth is generated by investing in multi-asset classes around the world. It means being in public equities in Europe. It means being in infrastructure in India, that kind of thing. But when you think about the impact on the state of Alaska, on employment in Alaska, on a solid economic, a good, robust economy for the state of Alaska, and its ability to generate other types of revenues, whether they be sales tax, income taxes, severance taxes, that will be weakened, which means that there will be incredible pressure on the fund to continue to maintain that percent of market value of at least $3 billion so that the state can continue to provide a basic level of services. So that to me is the real impact, not on our earnings themselves, but on the importance of those earnings to the state's overall ability to deliver important key services.
So that kind of dovetails nicely with the next question that came up, which was what external threats does the fund face, and are there any steps that the legislature or the state administration could take to try to help mitigate those?
I think the external threats to the fund are more within Alaska than they are outside of Alaska. And it's that sense of we want to be able to have it all. And where do we make sacrifices? Who is going to bear the brunt of those sacrifices, and what do they look like? And if we choose to pursue spending the fund down for a variety of reasons, and they're all very good reasons that people talk about why we should be, doing more, whether it's we should be investing more in Alaska, supporting businesses, we should be funding full dividends at this time of austerity for the state. There's a cost to that, because when money leaves the fund, it doesn't have a way back in today into the fund. And so we just have to recognize that if we want to have a robust, stable revenue source for multi-years to take care of our kids, to take care of our grandchildren, to support the state, that we need to be conscientious about how we use the fund and be very prudent in our spending. And the POMV is a very prudent spend rule, And it would be unfortunate if we chose to go down a different path where we no longer took care with how we spent our resources.
Well, and you did bring up the PFD, which is always comes into play in these discussions. So one of the questions was, can the state afford to pay out a full PFD, whatever you define that as? I don't know how much you can speak to that in your official role, but is there anything you can tell us about that?
I think the most difficult thing about public office in Alaska right now is having to decide between and prioritize what we spend the limited resources we have on. The state can pay a full PFD, or it can pay for other essential services, but it can't do both at the full rate it has been. So something has to go, and luckily I don't have to say what that is. But it's just the nature of the beast, unless you want to really overdraw down the fund. But then there's not a balance to earn future earnings, right? So if we have 60 billion today and we have 50 billion next year, 50 billion earns by definition less than 60 billion. It's simple math. There's no magic.
Darn, I was really hoping there was going to be some magic here. We could use it this year.
I know, me too, me too.
So the last question that came in, I'm just going to have to read it verbatim because I'm not sure I totally understand it, is that if over time the fund balance has stayed stable, isn't that also saying it's been stagnant, especially when viewing the growth of other sovereign funds?
Stagnant. Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, if you're going to take all the growth every year, so if the POMV of 5% is happening every year, and that's not an inflation adjusted number, that is a nominal, that is a real number. And if your growth is plus inflation is less than that 5%, you're going to stagnate. Hopefully, ideally, we will be able to keep up with that and continue to get money into the permanent part of the fund to allow it to grow. But yes, there is a possibility that stability is also can be stagnation. It hasn't yet in 40 years, but it is a possibility.
Okay. Well, that takes care of all the questions that we've had come in. Oh, I spoke too soon. One came in as I started to say that. So is the goal to get the fund to 100 billion more? Okay. I haven't prepped this one. Is the goal to get the fund to 100 billion more important than stabilization policy of the state of Alaska?
I think it's really important for the future of the state of Alaska that we have a stable policy, and how the fund is a piece of that overarching policy. It is not more important that we get to $100 billion, but it's going to be difficult to come up with a stable policy given the reliance on the fund. It just is.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I know that there are some more questions starting to trickle in, but unfortunately we do have to make sure that we can move on in a timely manner here. So just for anyone watching live or re-watching, Katie did post in the chat a link to the Alaskans Guide to the Fund that Angela had mentioned. So if anyone's interested in checking that out, you can link directly from the chat. So thank you again so much, Angela, for the insight and the update on Alaska's Permanent Fund. It definitely, like I said, it's educational, I think, for all of us, even if we are paying attention. There's things that we just don't realize that are happening on a day-to-day basis behind the scenes. So thank you to Angela. Thank you to our membership and our community who joined us today online. We look forward to seeing you next week for our annual awards and membership meeting. Remember that registration is required so that we can hook you up with a great lunch from one of our local restaurants. That's an important part of the process. So please don't forget to buy your tickets by this Friday on our website. You can just go to fairbankschamber.org and click on that banner on the homepage. We try to make it as easy as possible. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today, and be well, Fairbanks.